Thank you to Hero Cosmetics for sponsoring this episode of Beyond Contempt. Hey everyone, I need to tell you about Mighty Patch, which is a hydrocolloid acne patch. You know, I've had extra stress in my life lately, and my face has been breaking out more than usual. So you take their Mighty Patch, stick it on your face at night, and when you wake up in the morning, you'll see a reduction with your pimples. When you toss the patch away, you can see the grime and realize that it was doing all of the heavy lifting. Their products are cruelty-free, vegan-friendly, and super gentle on your skin. Check out the products on their website. You'll notice that they have great reviews. If you want to try Mighty Patch for yourself, use code BEYOND15 for 15% off on herocosmetics.com. That's BEYOND 15 for 15% off.
This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. Today, we're back in the thick of it with a story of an unstable priest and child sexual abuse. The biggest travesty of this case was the failure of the diocese to audit themselves and be accountable to their parishioners. This priest had incidents prior to entering the seminary and had another accusation while he was a priest. His behavior was often questionable, and the diocese looked the other way and allowed him to have access to minors in a school setting. I think it's fair to say that we've all practiced willful disbelief at some moment in our lives. Sometimes it's a protective mechanism that gets us through a difficult time, and other times it's a dangerous choice that harms the community. You're listening to episode 25, Father Ryan Erickson. Ryan Gene Erickson was born on January 17, 1973, in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, to parents Dennis and Mary. Dennis was a Vietnam veteran who worked as a prison guard and had a nasty habit of over-consuming alcohol daily. Ryan grew up in Campbellsport, which is a tiny village in Fond du Lac County. He was athletic and took part in wrestling, football, track, and cross-country. They transferred his father to a new job when he was 17. Ryan didn't want to change high schools, so he stayed behind and lived with a priest named Michael Moran. Michael made an impression on young Ryan, and this was where the seeds of religion were planted, and later blossomed into a strong religious dogmatic belief. Those that dared question religious doctrine were met with Ryan's aggression. He graduated from Campbellsport High School in May 1992. Ryan would visit his parents in the summer at a campground in Eagle River, Wisconsin. The summer after graduation, Ryan had a boy over to his trailer. He told the 15-year-old young man stories about the devil as he gave the boy a massage and fondled his private parts. Ryan offered him oral sex, but was turned down. When the boy went home, he told his mom what transpired. The mother called the police and sent her son to therapy because she believed her son was questioning his sexual orientation. The police looked into the matter and decided that the boy was unreliable. Ryan worked at the campground bar for a brief time, but was caught stealing alcohol and was dismissed from that job. He didn't stick around the campground much after that. Later on, an anonymous caller dialed up the Minneapolis Star-Tribune to share a story about how Ryan sexually assaulted him when he was 15 years old, back in 1991. This caller claimed that they watched porn together and fell asleep. The caller woke up when his genitals were being touched by Ryan. Since the caller was anonymous, it's hard to know if this was the young boy from the campground, or perhaps this was a different incident. Some classmates thought Ryan was a charming and funny guy, but other people saw the darker side of his personality. Ryan was an open racist, and this was confirmed by one of his former coworkers. He was violent towards animals, and once threw a cat into the air and took a shot at it. It was also reported that he put animal remains on stakes. With Ryan's strong religious convictions, it wasn't a surprise that he went to the seminary. The chief goal of seminary is to guide youthful men towards responsibility and maturity so they can embrace a life of service. The priesthood has a few requirements. The candidate must be male, under 50, and be in good health. They should have graduated high school or must be within a year from graduating. They need to be baptized and confirmed Catholic. There can be no marital obligations. It might take 4 to 8 years to become a diocesan priest. It's standard that the seminary candidate take a psychological evaluation. In July 1992, Ryan underwent his screening. He admitted that he had sexual contact with his 4-year-old male cousin when he was 6. Ryan also admitted that he had sexual contact with a 14-year-old boy when he was 17. He passed his evaluation, and it was determined that he was healthy and without problems. They sent him to start his training at the Immaculate Heart of Mary Seminary, which was part of St. Mary's University of Minnesota in Winona. In March 1994, the Vilas County, Wisconsin District Attorney's Office called the bishop and vocation director of the Diocese of Superior. They were looking into Ryan's 1992 incident that took place at the Eagle River Campground. The bishop then contacted Ryan and let him know that they were aware of this investigation. When confronted by the church officials, Ryan claimed that the allegation wasn't true. They removed him from all apostolic work until they had an investigation outcome. Church leadership wanted Ryan to get professional counseling and testing from a clinical psychologist. He saw a therapist and continued to see one for 2 years. In July 1994, the DA's office decided that they would not file charges. Since there were no witnesses, they determined that they could not corroborate the event. Ryan's latest psychological evaluation determined that he was still a suitable candidate to continue on with the seminary program and would make a caring priest. Ryan then applied to attend the St. Paul Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Part of the admission process required another evaluation. In September 1996, the evaluator thought his inappropriate sexual behavior was not a significant part of his psychology. The psychologist did not believe that he was predatory, and he wasn't a high risk for acting sexually aggressive. The evaluator thought Ryan was heterosexual, and he would be vulnerable around the opposite sex. During his time at St. Paul, Ryan started wearing a priest's cassock, which was the standard black robe with the white collar seen in Catholic church services. His fellow students referred to him as Monsignor, which was an honorary designation and acknowledgement of power, more so than a position of hierarchy. Even though he was respected by his peers, Ryan still struggled with following the seminarian's pious path to priesthood. During seminary, Ryan did a semester abroad in Israel and was drinking excessively, so they asked him to undergo another psych evaluation. Ryan assured his seminary superiors that he would stop drinking and sought help from AA. In 1999, he secured an internship working once a month at St. Anne's Parish in Somerset, Wisconsin. After completing all the seminarian training, the St. Paul Seminary staff thought it was time to consider ordaining him. The vote was 14 people in favor of Ryan's ordainment, and there was one sole dissenter. One of Ryan's professors questioned his character because he didn't take responsibility for his actions and was a manipulative person. With a 14-1 vote, they ordained Ryan on June 4, 2000, at St. Anne's Church. Shortly after, Father Ryan Erickson reported to his first assignment at St. Patrick's Church in Hudson, Wisconsin. In the 1960s, the Second Vatican Council, often referred to as Vatican II, comprised thousands of bishops and religious leaders who brought mass change to the Catholic Church. They attempted to make it more inclusive and open than it was previously. The modern world was changing, and they needed to keep up if they were going to maintain a church base. They allowed Mass to be conducted in local languages. Priests could now face the congregation during Mass, and they allowed their congregation to visit houses of worship of different denominations without the worry of being banished to hell. If one were to describe Father Erickson's worldview, he was a pre-Vatican II priest. Some people said he exhibited a harsh right-wing extremism. Father Erickson was tremendously rigid and relished an old church tradition. He still thought that Mass should be conducted in the church's original language of Latin. Father Erickson often concealed the gun under his cassock or under his Mass outfit. He believed in delivering a hellfire and brimstone Mass. There was no room for light-hearted talk. Father Erickson lectured to church attendees about mortal sins like contraception, abortion, and masturbation. His impassioned sermons would sometimes result in him breaking down and crying. During this time, he was also upgraded to a Monsignor's outfit. Think of the traditional black priest's outfit with a white collar, and then add a fuchsia waistband. A fraction of Father Erickson's parishioners did not care for him, while a similar amount of attendees embraced his every word. Most of the parish was neutral. His admirers were called kneelers because they got down on their knees during consecration. For my non-Catholic listeners, consecration is the bread and wine during Holy Communion. The kneelers enjoyed his passionate hellfire and brimstone sermons and appreciated the less watered-down version of Mass, even though it made some uncomfortable. The people who didn't like Father Erickson were called standers. They thought he brought the church backwards in time. This crowd wanted him to say something positive in his sermons, like talking about forgiveness or happiness. They tired of Father Erickson only talking about sins. The standers also found it strange that he cried during church service. Some of the standers' crowd practiced willful disbelief and waded through their discomfort during the sermon. They pretended to not be aware of what Father Erickson was doing, just so they could get through Mass. Father Erickson often sent unorthodox emails to his parishioners, like this. Even Sunday Mass is not safe from the immodest dress of some devils. They come to read, give out Holy Communion, looking like an advertisement. Their modest dress says to all present, I'm easy. Please go home and masturbate to my beautiful body. The sad thing is that some do. In addition to giving sermons at St. Patrick's Church, Father Erickson had a leadership role in the Christ Renews Us parish group. This special group attempted to give parishioners personal clarity to help people lead a purpose-driven life. They tried to frame and answer questions about, why are we here? What matters in life? What is mortal sin? And how does it shape my decision-making? Many of the church attendees had children in the St. Patrick's School, and it didn't take Father Erickson long before he started helping out there. Principal Pat Brander was initially thrilled to have Father Erickson working with the kids. He helped with sexual education. His focus, of course, was on mortal sins, abortion, and masturbation. He really placed emphasis on masturbation. Father Erickson insisted that the students attend confession with him. Students who showed hesitation were pushed into attending. Father Erickson would say, "Why haven't you seen Father this week?" The students who had ultra-conservative parents held Father Erickson in high esteem and were hoping that he could play a larger role at St. Patrick's School. After spending time watching Father Erickson operate in her school, Principal Brander changed her mind and thought he should not be helping there at all. The fractured opinions of the parishioners turned into a contentious situation. There was a contingent of parents who agreed with the principal that Father Erickson needs to go. Those who were supportive of Father Erickson also strongly opposed Principal Brander. This vocal sliver of parents was very persistent and active in calling for her resignation. They would place brochures under the wipers of cars in the church parking lot, asking for the principal to step down from her position. Principal Brander did not like the way that Father Erickson conducted his old-school sermons, but she eventually succumbed to the pressure of the dissenting opinions on how she ran the school. She resigned in 2002, and as it would turn out, Principal Brander's instincts about Father Erickson were on the mark. On February 5, 2002, the medical examiner stopped in at O'Connell's funeral home to pick up a death certificate. In the funeral home's office, the owner, Dan O'Connell, and intern James Ellison had been shot and were dead. On February 9, 2002, Dan's funeral was held at St. Patrick's Church. James' funeral took place 2 days later at the Barron Area Community Center. Daniel Joseph was born on February 23, 1962, in St. Paul, Minnesota, to parents Thomas and Janet O'Connell. He graduated high school in 1981 and was a member of the Golden Key National Honor Society. Dan was known for being an affable young man, and he valued his community, so he volunteered his time at the Hudson Ambulance Service. During his senior year, Dan received his EMT certification. He even worked his way up to the director level for Hudson Ambulance. During this time, Dan attended the University of Wisconsin River Falls and worked on a degree in mortuary science, which he finished in 1992 with honors. Dan was successful and started O'Connell's Funeral Homes in 2 Wisconsin locations, Hudson and Baldwin. He was a member of both the National and Wisconsin Funeral Directors Associations. His businesses won the National Pursuit of Excellence Award. On October 22, 1998, Dan married a wonderful woman named Jenny Jo, and they had 2 children, Kyle and Caitlin. He went to every single event his kids were involved in. He never missed school plays, dance recitals, or sports events. Even though he was a busy business owner and family man, Dan found the time to volunteer for the Hudson Booster Club or the Knights of Columbus of St. Patrick's. He helped at the Pepper Festival of North Hudson by coordinating the Italian food and eating contests and helping with the parade. He even served as the Pepperfest King. If you're not from around this state, these small-town, Wisconsin-esque activities are held in high regard by locals, and men like Dan who are generous with their volunteer efforts are respected and loved by their communities. Dan was involved in fundraising for the Boy Scouts and the YMCA. Dan and his family prepared a dinner that fed over 2,000 people, raised over $25,000 per charity after September 11th. James Douglas Ellison was born to parents Karsten and Sally on October 22, 1979, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The family moved to Barron, Wisconsin. Like Dan O'Connell, James was a good-natured and caring kid. He was known for being an excellent friend and always wanted to help or comfort people. James also took part in many extracurricular activities, including 4-H, band, golf, bowling, and rollerblading. He often attended church activities and was the president of the Future Business Leaders of America. James was a graduate of Barron High School's class of 1998. He attended UW River Falls for 2 years, then transferred to the University of Minnesota to study mortuary science. James felt called to this major because he wanted to be there for people when they were going through the worst moments in life. His desire to make a career out of community service was crystallized when he apprenticed for the Rausch Rockman Funeral Home in Barron, Wisconsin. James would have graduated in May 2002, but since his life was cut short, the university kindly graduated him posthumously. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. Thank you to Best Fiends for sponsoring this episode of Beyond Contempt. Let me tell you about this rad puzzle game. Best Fiends is a game you can play on your phone, and it's enjoyable because you go through all these levels, solving challenging puzzles that actually engage your mind and keep it active. Many of us are seeking out entertainment, and this is the perfect game to fill that need. The cool thing about it is that it doesn't take up much of your time. You can put the game down and easily pick it up later on where you left off. You don't need an internet connection to play, so it's convenient, especially when your internet goes down like mine often does. Best Fiends updates the game monthly with new levels and events, so it never gets old. Engage your brain with fun puzzles and collect tons of cute characters. Trust me, with over 100 million downloads, this 5-star rated mobile puzzle game is a must-play. Download Best Fiends, free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. Now, back to the show. The police had a few original theories about what happened to Dan and James. The dominant theory that they were operating on was that Dan and the killer had an argument, and James was murdered because he was a witness. Another theory was that the Wisconsin anti-embalming cult, called the Rest of Jesus, had murdered the men. A third theory was that pot smokers went to the funeral home because they were seeking embalming fluid to combine with their marijuana. Once people realized that police didn't need a license to buy embalming fluid, and it wasn't so cost-prohibitive that someone would need to steal it, they quickly dispelled this theory. Besides the one reasonable theory and the two unlikely ones, there were rumors floating around the community. The first rumor was that James and Dan witnessed someone at the mortuary doing something to or with a corpse, and they were killed because they had seen too much. The second rumor was that someone lifted $10,000 from Dan's September 11th fundraiser, and the murder was a cover-up. After the murders, Father Erickson's behavior was off. He had taken part in Dan's funeral at St. Patrick's, but for once he was subdued and kept his extreme personality in check. A few parishioners found Father Erickson in the sacristy, crying and wailing about the sinfulness of abortion. The sacristy is the room where a priest gets ready before he gives a service. The parishioners were concerned and reported the incident to the diocese. Subsequently, they transferred Father Erickson in September 2003 to Our Lady of Sorrows in Ladysmith, Wisconsin. The church officials never confirmed the reason for the relocation. Some say it was because of the wailing incident. Others said it was a routine move. Prior to Father Erickson's relocation, the head priest of St. Patrick's Church became direly sick, and his survival was uncertain. This head priest made a full recovery, but only after Father Erickson moved on to his next assignment. The rumor that permeated the church was that Father Erickson had poisoned the head priest because he wanted to run the show. One time when the head priest had taken vacation, Father Erickson took over the church and acted as though he was the head priest in charge. Father Erickson didn't last long at Our Lady of Sorrows and was transferred less than a year later, in August 2004, to St. Mary of the $7 in Hurley, Wisconsin. The bishop at Our Lady of Sorrows grew tired of Father Erickson's drinking and had put him in for this transfer. In April 2004, it had been just over 2 years since the double murder, and police were still investigating it. A victim of sexual abuse surfaced, which helped redirect the investigation and place the detectives on a path that led to Father Erickson's front door. The police interviewed the sexual assault victim. Let's just call him Jake, since his name has never been published. Jake said Father Erickson repeatedly molested him when he was between the ages of 16 and 17. Father Erickson plied Jake with alcohol when the two were at St. Patrick's Rectory. He fondled Jake in his bed and then watched the boy shower. Jake was so inebriated that what transpired was slightly fuzzy, so he didn't believe that there were acts of oral or anal sex. It was primarily Father Erickson groping his private parts. This happened approximately 10 times from 2000 to 2001. Jake told no one, and it wasn't until he was sitting in psychology class a few years later at university where he learned about sexual predators grooming their victims. His experiences with Father Erickson flooded into perspective, and he went to the Bismarck, North Dakota police early in 2003. Jake didn't want anyone else to suffer through what he'd experienced with a father. The Bismarck police took a report from Jake and sent it to the Hudson police in April 2003. It took the Hudson police a whole year before they interviewed Jake because the sexual assault had been omitted from the police report. And the only infraction in the report was that an adult supplied a minor with alcohol. Therefore, it wasn't as much of a priority. The police interviewed a second victim. We will call him Michael, since his name has never been revealed. Michael spent time with Father Erickson and Jake at St. Patrick's Rectory. Father Erickson always provided them with copious amounts of alcohol. Michael was fortunate in that he was never inappropriately touched, but he believed that Father Erickson was grooming him. Michael witnessed changes in Jake during that time. Jake was drinking more, and Michael suspected there was something sexual taking place. But his adolescent mind couldn't go there. It was a willful and understandable suspension of disbelief, because in what world would a trusted priest do such a thing to a child? On November 11th, 2004, a Hudson police detective and the chief of police interviewed Father Erickson. They were there to take his statement about his inappropriate actions with minors, but they also wanted to ask him about the murders of Dan O'Connell and James Ellison. They asked Father Erickson why he thought the two men were killed. The father's response was that they were likely involved with the mafia, therefore killed because of those connections. The detectives asked Father Erickson how the men were killed. The father said that Dan was sitting behind his desk and James was going through a door. As detectives often do, they had held back information about the murders from the public. The positions of James and Dan's bodies in the funeral home office had been withheld from the media. When asked where he heard this information, Father Erickson said he heard it on the news. And just like that, Father Ryan Erickson now ranked as the top suspect with the Hudson police for the murders of Dan O'Connell and James Ellison. The interview with detectives shook Father Erickson because he immediately told the deacon's wife that there was no way he was going to prison because he knew what went on there, and there was no way he would let that happen. On December 7th, law enforcement interviewed Father Erickson a second time. Detectives were collecting more information about the child sexual abuse, and they also wanted to know where Father Erickson was at the time of the murders. The father admitted to supplying alcohol to minors and acknowledged that he'd laid down next to Jake in bed. Father Erickson claimed that he was at St. Patrick's School and had signed the sign-in sheet the day of the murders, but there were no people there he could remember who witnessed it. Father Erickson also said that he didn't know how he found out about the details of the murders. The pressure of these interviews was building up for Father Erickson, and he started bringing up suicide with the detectives. They offered to check him into a psychiatric facility, but he declined. They slated Father Erickson for a polygraph test on December 14th, but he called the day before and told the detectives that his attorney advised against it. Father Erickson called up his friends and fished for an alibi for 1 to 3 p.m. on February 5, 2002. When police reviewed the evidence, it implicated Father Erickson because there was a witness who verified that a car similar to his was leaving the funeral home around the time of the murders. The driver of that car resembled Father Erickson as well. There was a witness who verified that Dan told her that Father Erickson was a child sexual abuser and he was going to confront him. There was email evidence that Father Erickson and Dan had been arguing the day prior to the murders. Detectives presented the evidence implicating Father Erickson to the county's attorney, Eric Johnson. Eric wanted to go through the evidence, talk with the victims' families, and then he wanted to make this public. A search warrant was issued on December 16, 2004, and allowed the police access to Father Erickson's room, where they found his computer. They also took the father's guns. Besides the forensic considerations, police were worried that he would attempt suicide. Law enforcement later found his last will and testament on his computer. The father had changed this document after his first police interview in November, then changed it again after the second interview in December. Then they found over 40 images of gay and prepubescent male pornography. The images depicted young males in several positions and settings, without their clothes, masturbating, or engaging in oral or anal sex. This spelled game over for the father. On December 18, 2004, Father Erickson conducted 4 p.m. Mass. Afterward, he went out to dinner with his 2 friends, Richard and Tom. They felt he was upset over everything, but didn't appear to be distraught. The trio watched 2 movies, then went to bed. Everyone stayed in the rectory that night. The next day at 7 in the morning, Richard said hello to Father Erickson on his way to prepare for church. Everything appeared to be normal. In the brief time it took for Richard to get ready for church and leave the rectory, he saw something hanging from a rope on his way out. It was Father Erickson. Richard rang the rectory bell and called the police. There was a letter sitting on the table that was addressed to Richard and Tom. In the letter, Father Erickson thanked them for being excellent friends. I've lived a hard but exciting life. I learned and I taught. I helped people and I hurt them, but I never killed anyone. My ego, my pride, my lust, my envy have always stopped me from being the best person I could be. I am tired. He also left a letter sitting on his computer that was addressed to his parents. All of us are a mixture of angel and devil. Each of us does good and evil. No matter how good we look to the world, we each have our favorite sins, which we keep private even as we battle against them. There is no one who is perfect. I am above all the least in perfection. I have preached truth, but I found myself unable to live it in its entirety. This murder investigation is a turkey shoot. They want to hang it on someone. So use character assassination to achieve their goal. I did not murder anyone. I did not kill Dan or James. In the letter, Father Erickson also stated that he felt tormented with anxiety, worry, fear, and stress since he was 12 years old. He was tired of the evil in the world, and the evil he himself put into the world with his lust. He also tried to assert evidence that he was innocent. Father Erickson said that none of his guns matched those from the murder. None of his DNA was found, and there were no witnesses that saw him leave in the funeral home. On December 27, 2004, Father Erickson's funeral was held at St. Matthew's Catholic Church back in Camelsport, Wisconsin. The official word from the diocese was that there was no conclusive evidence that Father Ryan was involved with any of the tragic outcomes for Dan O'Connell or James Ellison. Some might say that this was an act of willful disbelief on the part of the diocese. Unfortunately, their statement increased the pain for the O'Connell and Ellison families. Even in the wake of Father Erickson's suicide, and as Principal Pat Brander attested to, there were two polarized camps of people. There were the detractors who thought he was guilty of the murders, and there were the people who staunchly supported him, despite the hard evidence of child pornography. Some parents rejected the notion that Father Erickson could have abused their children. This made it very difficult on the police, since so many people refused to help them in their continued investigation of Father Erickson. Then there was the speculation on what his sexual orientation was, instead of keeping the focus on his pedophilia. But perhaps that was a sign of the prevailing culture in Wisconsin in the mid-2000s. A woman from Wasaki, Wisconsin, had known Ryan from his campground days in Eagle River. Her son was 14 and hung out with the 18-year-old heavy-drinking Ryan. She said that he often spoke about wanting to become a priest, but she thought he was gay, and he wanted very little to do with women, especially those who flirted with him. While Ryan never abused her son, he also told his mom to never leave her 8-year-old grandkid alone with Ryan. However, he never offered reasoning on the matter. Then there was supporter and parishioner Helen Shaw, who thought the rumors of Father Erickson's homosexuality were laughable. She thought he was the holiest of priests. Helen knew he wasn't gay because she's a mom, and moms know these things. Her kids were close to Father Erickson, inside and outside of the church. The father even went over to their house often. Helen said she looked for signs and randomly walked into the room when Father Erickson was alone with the children. Not one time did she have a reservation about the situation. Some of Father Erickson's supporters disputed his suicide. One person claimed that someone could have staged the suicide to cover up a murder. Supporter Helen Shaw thought investigators pushed Father Erickson to commit suicide after being asked about participating in sexual acts with children. Helen truly believed Father Erickson loved kids and wouldn't hurt them. Because Father Erickson was deceased, there could be no criminal trial, and a John Doe hearing was held instead in October 2005 in the St. Croix County Court in Hudson, Wisconsin. John Doe hearings determine if a crime was committed and would dictate if the murder cases of Dan O'Connell and James Ellison could be closed. The O'Connell and Ellison families were on board with pursuing Father Erickson's guilt. Mary Pagel worked for St. Patrick's School and testified that on the morning of the murders, she saw Dan O'Connell at a local Walmart. After a bit of small talk, Dan hit her with a piercing question. Since Mary was a school bus driver for St. Patrick's, he wanted to know if she had ever seen Father Erickson inappropriately interact with or touch a child. Mary had not seen any red flags. Then Dan asked her if Father Erickson interacted with mostly girls or boys. Mary said that Father Erickson ignored the girls and preferred to talk with the boys. Dan told Mary that he had a meeting at noon to confront Father Erickson. Mary wanted Dan to go to the police and not meet him alone. Dan assured her that he could take care of himself. Mary was in her bus outside St. Patrick's School later that day at 11:15 a.m. She witnessed Father Erickson leave the rectory in plain clothes. which stuck in her memory because he rarely wore anything other than his priest wardrobe. Then he left the school in his light-colored sedan. Mary Pagel had taken a polygraph prior to the John Doe hearing and passed the test. The next testimony was given by Mike Swamby, a church member. He said that in spring 2002, Father Erickson told him he argued with Dan the night prior to the murder. Father Erickson did not expand on what the argument was about, but he said that the devil or demon is gone. Mike had also taken a polygraph prior to this hearing and passed the test. Russell Lundgren was a deacon at St. Mary's, which was Father Erickson's last assignment at the time of his death. Deacon Russell's assessment was that Father Erickson was troubled, disturbed, and unstable. The deacon spoke with Father Erickson the day after his first interview with detectives. Father Erickson was beside himself when detectives questioned him about the murders. But as his conversation with the deacon progressed, Father Erickson's upset morphed into anger. As the father turned and looked out the window, he said he had done it, and he would get caught. When Deacon Russell asked for an explanation, Father Erickson said, "Do you know what they do to young guys in prison, especially priests?" The deacon pressed for more details, but Father Erickson changed the conversation. In a different conversation, Father Erickson told Deacon Russell that he was upset because his dog had chewed on the remote control. Deacon Russell told him that TV remotes were cheap and offered to reprogram the new one for him. The discussion took a disturbing turn, and Father Erickson said, "I think I'll just invest 13 cents in a slug and put it between his eyes." Jake and Michael, the victims of Father Ryan's grooming and abuse, also provided their testimony. Judge Lundell presided over the hearing and decided that Father Erickson probably murdered Dan O'Connell and James Ellison, and he definitely sexually assaulted one minor. Father Erickson had both the motive and opportunity to commit these crimes. The judge proclaimed that the circumstantial evidence for this case was the strongest he had ever heard, and on a scale of 1 to 10, this was a 10. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit beyondcontemptpodcast.com for links to the sources used in this episode. This episode was researched by Haley Gray. Script writing, editing, and all audio production were performed by me. If you like the show, please leave me a favorable review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, everyone.